Bug-Eyed Tales presents The Man-Eater by S. Fragoso Lima, translated from Spanish to English and adapted from his short novel originally entitled El Devorador de Hombres.
I, Raja, mighty Bengal tiger, I'm going to speak in man's language to tell you about life with the cruel handler, Kimberley, who thinks he's tamed me. I, Raja, a tiger humbled, a tiger subdued. That's his mistake. He thought himself quite satisfied with my docility in allowing him to put his head in my mouth. But first, he must remember how I was hunted, and this will explain the great shame and burning thirst for revenge that has dried up my royal soul during my 5 years of captivity. I was born in the remote areas of Ramahal, 15 leagues from the Ganges, which is to say in the very heart of Bengal. My father was the pride of the tigers in the region, and consequently enjoyed the darkest reputation among men. More than 30 men had instantly left this world after encountering him, and it's fair to say that my father had sought out and desired these encounters, and felt, from a very young age, the pride of our high lineage. My greatest hope was to become what my father was, a devourer of men. Yes, a man-eater. This label spoke loudly of our valor, strength, and audacity. The entire jungle was ours before. Then the men came. Why did they come to the jungle? We didn't go to their fields, and since our food was the same, there was no possible peace. But back then, my father, in the prime of his life, was the dark king of Bengal, and no one, neither the wolf, nor the peasant, nor the hunter, failed to tremble to the very core of their nerves at the mere possibility of suddenly seeing the terrifying image of my father appear upon turning a corner. Several times, death campaigns had been launched against him, and he had almost always managed to attract the line of beaters to drive game out of the woods and into the open. But at one time, he was forced to jump on the hunters under a hail of bullets. As a result, 2 fewer hunters lived in the world, and on his part, my father was left with only 1 eye. But on the other hand, what respect and terror he incites in the hearts of men, what immense pride in his cub, and what disdain he had for the cowardly masters of the world. This disdain lost him and us that ultimately led to his own downfall. This had a negative impact on the rest of the brood. I was then 4 months old. My father showed real pleasure in me, and more than once he allowed me, although grumbling, to try out my tender claws on his thick skin, to practice my hunting skills. From 3 months onwards, he often took me with him, and although his attacks then were not against large game, it proved to be excellent training for me. So one afternoon I was accompanying him to the creek, when my father suddenly stopped short with an imperceptible grunt. I also stopped, and as I watched, he remained completely still, slowly turning his head from side to side without moving a muscle. This sudden caution was my first alarm, and I confess that it filled me with immense fear. You see, for us, any unusual noise or unknown footprint is a warning sign, putting us on high alert as if we need to be prepared to defend ourselves against a formidable threat, like a buffalo.
I take a good look at this,
my father said.
It's a human footprint.
He pointed out on the damp earth a long and wide footprint at one end, quite similar to ours, but much longer. I gazed at the enemy track with a strong heartbeat. So it was from men, from the masters of the world. These belonged to all of them, but not from my father. One by one, my father had taken down 30 of those formidable opponents. 30! A spark of childish pride ignited in my gaze. As an answer, my father tucked his tail under his belly and with his snout to the ground, he sniffed one by one the footprints, grunting softly. We returned in silence, with immense caution not to make the same mistake again.
I found human tracks by the stream,
my father said as he entered the cave.
Have they seen you?
My mother asked, very worried.
Oh no, but they haven't discovered us. The track stops about 100 meters from the cave. They'll be here tomorrow.
My father had been a hunter and prey for too long to be wrong about this. But since it's a safety rule for tigers not to leave the den until we feel we're really being attacked, we didn't move. It was 6 a.m. when the first cry was heard. My mother was sleeping, and I thought my father was too. But looking closely, I saw his eyes fixed on the ground, since he had his head resting on his hands. Then his eyes became glued to the cave's entrance, watching out for any threats. New voices pierced the thicket and reached us, coming much closer. My father stood up suddenly. In an instant, my mother did the same. I turned questioning eyes to my father.
Yes, they're close,
He said in a choked roar, its deep notes echoing in the cave. The enemy was getting closer. The beaters' shouts grew louder, and a moment later, a dull noise began to be felt. The bamboos were being violently struck. Thus, in a perfect circle, the beaters advanced, striking, shouting, closing in relentlessly, forcing the trapped animals into that vast net. My father, seized with vivid agitation, was pacing back and forth from the depths to the entrance of the cave. He would stop at each turn, listening intently, and opening his mouth in a yawn that revealed all his teeth, before returning to the depths again. I say yawn because that's what it looked like at the time. However, I later learned through experience that such a gesture can be a sign of tension or threat rather than relaxation, and doesn't guarantee safety for the one who makes it. The circle was closing in tighter and tighter. I could now hear the insults that the beaters were hurling at my father.
Tio, aren't you ashamed to hide there?
This was one of the insults hurled at my father by the beaters, trying to goad him into coming out of the cave.
You're more cowardly than a rat, skinny uncle. You dirty yellow chicken son of a jackal. You nephew of a cobra, we are coming to get you.
My mother thought about me with anguish. What should we do?
Quick, run, or you won't be able to get through the line.
My mother then prepared to break through the fatal circle, and I followed her. But when I turned my eyes from the entrance and saw my father lying down, his head in his hands, and concentrating all the energy of his magnificent life for the mortal struggle he was about to face, I felt in that moment my young heart expanding with boldness, and my father fell silent too. Now the tension was palpable, the anticipation keen. His silence, a moment of very intense suspense. "I'm staying," I said to my mother. She let out a cruel growl, turning her head halfway, and possibly would have followed it with a swipe at the disobedient son.
Hurry, hurry,
My father exclaimed,
leave him.
and I saw his eyes glowing with a faint phosphorescent light, and already with a kind of mournful magnificence, fixing itself for a long time on the bold little eyes of his royal cub. For an instant, my mother sniffed the wind from the thicket. Then she flattened her ears and, crouching, slipped into the bamboo thicket. The female was safe. Then, affirming his powerful stature, he extended his neck and let out a vibrant, fiery roar that made the entire cave tremble. A warning that my father sent to the attackers. The thunder of shouts and blows that followed immediately after the roar proved that it had been heard. From that moment on, my father did not cease to roar. It was a titanic drumbeat of sustained pulmonary force, driven by an indomitable courage. The cave trembled to its foundations. My nerves, stirred by that atmosphere of struggle, roused my royal lineage and vibrated in rhythm with the defiant roars. The clamor, now deafening, stopped abruptly, and my father fell silent too. In the deep silence that followed, a voice finally reached us.
"He's in there, in the cave. The men don't want to come any closer."
It was the leader of the beaters who spoke. In fact, his men didn't dare take another step. Their task had ended, and the rest was now up to the hunters. Then I saw from the depths of the clearing in the woods that was in front of our cave, someone was advancing. He was the first to appear, a very young man almost a boy.
Hey, Aberdale, are you crazy? Don't get too close. When a tiger doesn't roar, it's bad business.
That's because I want to see him.
The teenager replied, without stopping his approach.
Aberdale, for all the tigers of Ramahall,
The voice shouted again in a hoarse tone.
you're going to be torn apart alive. You don't know what kind of beast that man-eater is. Wait, for Christ's sake.
Well, come on then.
Replied young Lord Aberdale, stopping barely 20 meters away from us. Then I was able to observe the young lord carefully. As I said, he was just a teenager. He had a face as pale as wax, and a pair of beautiful black and melancholic eyes which shone with deep gentleness. He had advanced towards the cave with the confident gaze and elegant stride of someone who knows well that their heart will not tremble. And if one considers that he was heading towards a Bengal tiger, a man-eater, cornered in its lair, one will understand the mettle of that young heart. Tiger, fierce and forced as I was, I couldn't help but admire the courage in that almost angelic face. At the same time, it awakened a protective impulse towards him, and forever, in my heart. Why? I don't know. Perhaps it was the extreme youth of the hunter. Meanwhile, 2 more hunters had emerged from the background. One was tall and slender, with a large blonde beard. The other was Indian, possibly a prince. I saw the hunting party. With the triple advance, the drama was already nearing its end. On one side, we were huddled in the back of the cave, concentrating all our forces in fierce silence. On the other side, in equal silence, with energy stretched to its maximum tension, the 3 hunters advanced together, their weapons at the ready in their hands. The blonde-bearded man finally put his hand on the teenager's arm.
Stop, Aberdale. Enough of this foolishness. We're 15 meters from the cave, and the animal could almost reach us in one leap. You know I've hunted enough tigers to know what I'm saying. It's scared. Let's spread out in a line, and if you allow me, I'll take the center.
If you allow me, I'll take it.
Replied the young lord in his sweet and grave voice.
Hunter, as a renowned tracker, I believe you owe me the courtesy of taking the lead.
Very well, for the sake of gallantry.
Hunter couldn't help but smile.
You have more than enough heart to deny him this pleasure, because you know the saying, one aims at tigers with the heart, not with the eyes.
Aberdale took center position, and the 3 men advanced, after checking their weapons one last time. Hunter knew a tiger taking refuge in its lair won't emerge until it can launch a deadly, single leap. This certainty enabled them to chat and first inspect their weapons in the tense final moments. At the same time, my father, crawling on his belly, positioned himself on the right side of the cave. As the hunters took another step, the cave echoed with a deep, resonant roar from my father. Reverberating through the stone walls, I saw the men quickly take a step back and raise their weapons to their shoulders. A flash of pride blinded me, and in solidarity I let out a brief, puppy-like roar.
Fool.
My father growled at me. The air still trembled from the resonance of my father's roar, but Hunter misinterpreted my tone.
Watch out!
Throwing himself abruptly backward,
There are 2.
the Hindu shuddered violently. Aberdale didn't bat an eye. He simply lowered his gaze quickly to his rifle, then fixed his serene, unsuspecting stare back on the cave. But it shouldn't have been him, because my father, who was also observing him, whispered to me, pointing him out.
Be careful with that one. If there were 10 like him in India, our species would be doomed.
Bravo, I whispered, as my father gathered all the springs of his powerful musculature to jump. But with the change of posture, Hunter saw his phosphorescent eyes devouring him from within. Careful! I shouted out urgently. Before the shot could be fired, a hand swiftly fell on the barrel of Hunter's weapon. The teenager looked at him calmly.
Sorry, Hunter,
He said with his melodious voice.
but that shot belongs to me.
The blond man stifled a curse.
Do you think these are moments to have fun, prioritizing shots, Lord Aberdale?
He almost roared. The young man smiled, while a flash of mischief briefly crossed his eyes.
It's no good to speak to me like that, Hunter.
He replied sweetly, and taking 2 steps forward, he slowly lowered the barrel of his carbine. Then suddenly, with a terrible roar, my father jumped. "It's all over. It's finished," I said to myself with sadness, thinking of the heroic teenager. But a shot had sounded, followed by a horrific roar. It was my father, stopped in his jump by Aberdale's bullet, and who was rolling around, roaring in pain and rage.
Bravo, Aberdale. Good shot.
Bravo, bravo!
The 2 hunters exclaimed, while the entire forest resonated with the triumphant shouts of the beaters, who were running and shouting and striking everything around them in joy.
It's a dead beast already.
Watch out, Nanidan. It's coming at you.
Hunter interrupted with terror, but it was too late. My father, with a supreme effort, had just launched himself like a lightning bolt towards the Hindu prince, who rolled on the ground. 2 9mm bullets were fired, piercing my father's chest. But it was too late. He had already died from the previous fall. Meanwhile, the prince lay dead as well, with 5 streams of blood gushing from his throat. The beaters surrounded the gloomy scene, overcome with horror. In the center, my father lay stretched out, and Hunter and Aberdale were still tearing at the throat of the unfortunate prince with their hands. Suddenly, Hunter quickly picked up his weapon.
There's another one. Let's not forget.
It's a pup.
The teenager replied, without looking up.
Let's leave it alone.
A roar cut off his voice. The 2 hunters looked at each other in silence. That was not a pup's roar. The beaters, with a unanimous cry of terror, had started fleeing, shouting alarms.
It's the tiger's wife,
The tigress,
the mother of the cub.
A new roar sounded in the gloomy silence, and 30 meters from the somber group appeared, with a spectral shadow of revenge, my mother, who had been unable to break through the circle and had been waiting until she heard the death roar of my father. She stopped for an instant, glorious in strength and pain, just long enough to see my father's body lying on the ground. And with a piercing roar that contained all the vengeful anger of her being, she pounced on the hunters. Hunter, though mortally pale because a tiger in full charge offers a difficult target, and it's necessary to stop it with a bullet to the heart, or die, raised his rifle to his shoulder, waiting in a marble-like stillness for the beast to be 5 meters away. He had time to see Aberdale aiming as well, and to say to him quickly,
No, this time it's my turn.
My mother, in a terrible leap, fell upon him. Covering her with his gaze, the blond hunter, who in his tragic stillness was waiting for her, fired. A roar and a supreme cry of agony sounded together. The terrible beast, who had just opened Hunter's chest up to his belly, launched itself at Aberdale. He tried to fire a bullet between its eyes, but failed to stop it. Then the terrible struggle began. Aberdale, feeling the impact, had thrown away his rifle, now useless. With his left arm, he tried to hold off the first swipe, but ended up having it torn to shreds. With his right hand, he drew the sharp hunting knife from his waist. For a while, I could see 2 bodies rolling on the ground, and the teenager's arm rising and sinking into my mother's very entrails. Each blow was a new roar, and each roar was a new swipe at the torn human flesh. Gradually, the roars grew weaker as Aberdale's arm rose with less and less energy. There came a moment when the roar was a hoarse, painful, final gasp of agony until the knife no longer rose. By the trembling of the 2 battered bodies, I understood that my mother's claw, without rising, was slowly sinking in a supreme effort of death, and that Aberdale's dagger, also without rising again, was being pushed up to the hilt with the last breath that remained in the heroic teenager. Shaken and with a chill of desolation, I left the cave, There was not a single sound. The most mournful silence suffocated the jungle, and there, in the clearing where just a day before my father's imperial roar had resonated, now lay the lifeless body of the man-eater, with 3 bullets in his heart. 15 meters away, also gone in eternity, the lifeless cadaver of my mother, riddled with wounds. The scene was even more somber. 3 men lay in turn on the battlefield, victims of their fierce desire for extermination, and their death was the ransom of the wounded jungle, which had lost 2 of its royal animals. And of all that sinister roaring and shooting from half an hour before, nothing was left but me, the imperial cub, trembling on my legs, I who had relied too much on my strength. I slowly approached each of the bodies, sniffing them. Before the body of the Hindu prince, I couldn't contain myself. With a cruel snarl, I bared my teeth, and with a late roar of revenge, I sank my sharp fangs deeply into that human flesh. And I did the same with Hunter's body, biting the man with the great blonde beard. Already maddened by the taste of flesh, I approached the young Lord Aberdale. He was embracing my mother in a single block of blood and wounds, but when I sank my teeth into him, his body shuddered, and he remained motionless in surprise. Yes, he was still alive. The 20 daggers that my mother had hidden in her 4 claws had not been enough to end that heroic life of youth and energy. Lacerated, torn, pierced with wounds like a sieve, his body was still alive. His face, with a marble-like whiteness, gazed at the sky. I saw that before that heroic helplessness, my heart was filled again with the dark and fraternal affection that had overwhelmed me before. My father, my mother, my brothers, my entire family massacred. Everything disappeared before the beauty and valor of that 18-year-old hunter, the highest representative of a detested species. He seemed to have condensed in himself the cardinal virtues of the human species: blue blood, intelligence, and beauty. Above all, beauty. My heart beat with brotherhood and emulation before that adolescent, also a royal, who had done what my excess of youth did not yet allow me to do. But I owed the jungle the settlement of my current weakness. And at that moment I swore that when age tempered my valor, I would make the enemy species remember that I was the son of the man-eater, so that in full eternity the proud roar of my father would sound. A roar of pride and suffering, avenged in the triple wound of his heart. Another tremor shook the hero's body. He was surely going to die. Then, filled with immense sadness, I lay down beside him. What did anything matter to me? I couldn't think of anything to do, so I touched one of his torn hands without meaning to, and it felt like ice. Another wave of sadness pressed my heart, and without realizing what I was doing, I began to lick that hand, a flower of beauty, daring, and luck. What happened next was very quick. I suddenly heard a deafening roar, as the beaters came running from all sides with sticks and spears.
It's the cub. He's devouring the Lord.
Oh, cursed breed of cobra, you corpse-eater coward.
Let's move in quickly.
With complete indifference, I raised my head and saw them coming. What did anything matter to me now? I licked the marble-like hand one last time with my tongue, and at that moment I felt an atrocious pain in my chest, as if they were tearing my entrails out by force. A cloud of blood and shadow obscured my eyes, and I lost consciousness. Today, 5 years after that drama where I lost my freedom, the first days that followed come back to me like a dream. I remember that when I came to, I found myself inside a solid iron cage. I felt terrible pain all over my body, and when I tried to lift my head, the suffering made me groan. Someone sneered beside me, a voice dripping with sarcasm.
It seems we're back to our old ways. It seems we didn't have time to devour corpses.
I opened my eyes and saw a man observing me. He must have been waiting for some time, anticipating my return to consciousness. He had a thin yellow face, and his entire demeanor exuded cruelty. When I heard him, I looked at him with supreme indifference and closed my eyes again.
Good, good. You'll get over the drowsiness, young sleepyhead.
The fainting spell has passed?
I heard another voice ask.
Yes, there's nothing to fear now. What a deal for the captain. He doesn't have more than 4 months left if he survives.
Who? The cub. You don't know what kind of life these beasts have. I bet my turban against an old sandal that within 10 days it will be banging its head against the cage.
Really.
And you arrived just in time? Is it true that it was about to devour Lord Aberdale?
From head to toe.
When I heard Aberdale's name, I opened my eyes.
Hello. Looks like you remember, you cobra's fang.
The man with the cruel face hurled at me.
I believe you should be feeling regret for not sinking your teeth all the way into the great aristocrat. But you'll pay for it soon enough, Mosito.
And the Lord.
The other man continued.
From what I've been told, he's performed feats of incredible bravery.
He has the most tempered heart that exists, and with his angelic face, but he won't make it past tonight. What a shame. He's immensely wealthy and a peer of England.
Harmed by a tiger who seems like a human being.
There the voices fell silent, and a moment later, the fierce pain in my chest made me faint again. This went on for 30 days, during which I suffered not only from my own wounds, but also from the daily torment of insults, mistreatment, kicks, and iron blows from the hoarse-voiced man. There was no indigenous or European person, no matter how vile, who didn't come near my cage to mock me. I was sold to Captain Kimberley, owner of the famous Asian circus, which was receiving thunderous applause every night in Kolkata. So during those 30 days, I was constantly shaken in the miserable cage while I was being transported, until I finally arrived in Calcutta, far from my native jungle, 80 leagues away. All of this coming back to me like a nightmare as I entered a new life. Removed from the jungle forever, I lost my freedom and the early youth as a cub. During those 4 months, I was nurtured and educated by a true king. His reign ended in betrayal, marked by a double cross and stained with human blood. My new existence carried this bloody passport, and from then on, my baptismal certificate would bear this title: Raja, Royal Tiger of Bengal, son of Man-Eater, whose capture cost the life of Lieutenant William Hunter, first hunter of the Indian Empire, and the life of His Royal Highness, Zani Dan, son of the Maharaja of the Nizar. Raja, the tiger who brought Lord Aberdale, a peer of England, to the brink of death. This is the poster that Kimberley put up at the circus in large red letters on the day of my debut. When I found out that Lord Aberdale had not died, I felt the intimate, deep, unbreakable bond that had united us on that terrible day grow stronger. What did destiny have in store for us, having poured out that river of charm from his heart to mine? From that moment on, my memories became clearer. 1 long year of taming weighed heavily on my back and kidneys, not to mention my hunger and thirst. It's crucial to understand the enormous adjustment required to change my natural behavior and adapt to circus life. Only God knows how I had to keep all this terrible violence frozen inside me, waiting for the day when I can extract revenge. I know that not all trainers practice the same method of taming, and I understand that some achieve incredible feats through simple patience and understanding of our psychology. But in my case, I can attest that I was subjected to every form of daily torment, in an effort to extract what I was unwilling to give. My noble nature resisted and rebelled to the utmost against that cruel treatment. I did eventually submit, however, and I performed for 5 years, with a soul drenched in shame. But deep within my broken will and debased dignity, the burning flame of my revenge always smoldered, fueled by my own degradation. Nevertheless, once tamed, the imposed will is so strong that rebellions are rare, despite spending entire hours with our tamer. Until one day, a situation so unjust freed me from Kimberley's influence. That night, my 8 companions and I were rehearsing in the large iron cage. I was with 2 Ceylonese tigers, 3 lions, 2 panthers, and a leopard from Punjab. The act was the usual one for the group. The panthers, the leopard, and 1 lion remained motionless on 4 columns in a row. In front of them, 2 lions oscillated up and down. The Ceylonese tigers rolled in the opposite direction on wooden bars, and I, stretched out lengthwise on the floor, supported the triumphant tamer's feet on my flank as he stood on me, proudly waving a flag. There was no show that Monday night. We were working under a large electric spotlight when suddenly the light went out completely, and the deepest darkness reigned in the large cage. Our initial reaction was a mix of shock and bewilderment, followed by stunned silence. Next, a low, menacing growl echoed through the darkness, seeming to come from 6 different directions at once. I saw, or rather felt, that the panther, the leopard, and the lion were silently descending from their columns. The rhythmic motion came to a standstill, and the bars paused in midair. Next, the floor creaked softly as one by one the animals landed with precision. Their claws splayed wide in a cautious, deliberate motion. A deep shudder ran through my body. I felt the tamer's feet quickly withdrawing from my flank. What was going to happen? By the soul of those terrible tigers, the same lightning bolt of vengeance flashed through me. Finally, the night of our native forest had put us alone with our tamer. But suddenly, a sharp crack sounded. It was the whip, the formidable whip of the tamer, cracking in the air and shouting at us.
Guard!
This voice was not a growl, but a general roar that responded to that command. There was no longer any light, so it was ours. Kimberley must have understood this too, because from that moment on, he didn't stop lashing out at us with frenzied cracks. And step by step, with our snouts pressed to the ground, our souls burning with the same fire of revenge, we crept closer to him. The whip was cracking more and more violently, trying to contain, with desperate frenzy, the hellish mass of claws and teeth that were advancing towards him. But second by second, the tamer felt the eager panting getting closer. If the whip were to slip from his hands, he would be lost. As I watched the man futilely trying to fend off 8 fierce beasts with just a whip, a peculiar sensation took hold of me. While I felt no pity for this wretched individual, I experienced a stirring of my own dignity, a sense of solidarity with his desperate struggle against overwhelming odds. What was I to gain by joining in, adding my claws to the 56 sharp claws already poised to strike and tear into his flesh? That's why I withdrew from the assailants and went to throw myself against the bars of the cage. Right above my head was an electric switch that Captain Kimberley used to control some lights and, of course, the spotlight in the cage. I had calmly gone to throw myself there, and that's what doomed me. The panting of the beasts grew louder with the imminent attack, and the whip cracked ever more rapidly. For 2 minutes, the animal tamer had been fending off the beasts, and it's hard to fathom the immense pressure he was under, single-handedly keeping at bay 8 ferocious animals. And I was undoubtedly one of them, not just 8. Exhaustion was about to overcome Kimberley, but suddenly a flash of light illuminated the scene, accompanied by the loud report of a gunshot echoing through the large enclosure. It was the revolver, loaded with powder that every tamer carries as a last resort. And I say last resort because they only use it in extreme cases, as it is terribly dangerous. The beasts let out a roar, furiously charging at the tamer, but he had managed to see us coming from behind and, blinded by the flash, fired his weapon 3 more times at the most daring ones. Then, in a final effort, he reached the switch and with a swift motion, flooded the cage with violent light. It was about time. As the blinded beasts retreated with a deafening roar, the tamer opened and closed the door behind them. It was the last thing he could do. Pale, white as death from the tension, having barely gotten out alive, he collapsed to the ground, fainting. The guards, the servants, even the captain himself all accused me of having led the attack.
It was him. It can't be anyone else but him,
Shouted a cowardly and inquisitorial guard with whom I had a long-standing grudge.
It's Raja, the cursed son of the devourer.
He shouted from behind as they all ran, thrusting their irons through the bars to subdue the still roaring beasts, frustrated by the failed attack. They lunged at the poles, biting them furiously, but the cylindrical metal slipped from their teeth and claws. The blows intensified, and with them the rage of the untamed beasts. The shed resonated to the point of madness with the roars and screams. The scene is chaotic and intense, with the guards and others trying to subdue the fierce animals, who are still enraged and frustrated from the failed attack. The animals are biting and clawing at the metal poles, but they can't get a grip. The guards are using force to try and calm them down, but the animals are only getting more and more enraged. The shed is echoing with the sounds of roaring and screaming, creating a sense of chaos and pandemonium.
An exemplary punishment is needed.
Another guard howled, searching for me with his iron bar.
This one is going to finish us all off one day.
This one's a snake with legs, a poison dagger.
Enough!
The tamer shouted imperiously, coming towards me with visible effort. Everyone fell silent then, beasts and men. He was deathly pale and stopped in front of the cage, staring into my eyes. I, curled up in the back, slowly folded my legs, and without taking my gaze off his, remained motionless. For a moment, it could be said that a fine, sparkling ray of hatred was passing from one pupil to the other, mortally poisoned.
So, it's you.
He said to me with a voice trembling with contained anger.
How dare you become the captain of bandits? You, the son of a man-eater, that is, a brave tiger among all. And not content with this, you go and hide behind me to assassinate me treacherously while the others attack me from the front. Coward.
The accusation was so terribly unjust that I let out a vibrant roar.
Yes, coward.
The tamer thundered, rising to his full height. A murmur rose from the guards.
If the captain saw it, it was about to pounce on him, He's a coward.
But a timid and doubtful voice rose up.
Are you sure he was going to attack the captain?
Silence! The tamer shouted imperiously.
I saw him, Raja, crouching behind me to attack me, so you...
He launched directly at me.
You have to pay for it, damn beast. Grr. And soon.
Then, tired and disgusted by so much injustice and tyranny, I stood up and, fixing my eyes on his, sent him a roar of defiant scorn that fills the heart of a royal tiger facing a cowardly and cruel hyena. The tamer took it all in. His face turned even more livid with hate. Yes, and right now, he shouted, slapping his hand on the door.
Come on, guards, get all those animals out of here. Leave only Raja. We're going to be alone.
All training cages have a rear door that leads to the common living cage, which can be rolled in when needed. Once the exercise is over, the communication door is opened again, and the beasts enter their home once more. Like a wheel, it can be transported from one side to the other. So the maneuver was carried out in this sense. The guards disappeared with the beasts, and the captain and I were left alone. For an instant, I harbored the mad hope that the tamer would come in to punish me, with a whip, revolver, dagger, anything. Just that he would come in. I would have given anything for this to happen, but it wasn't like that. Kimberley took his hand to the cage door again, and before the electric shock and the flash of senseless joy that shone in my eyes, he understood what I wanted.
Ah, no, my former friend.
He exclaimed with a sarcastic laugh.
Those times are long gone. Now we're going to work a little separated.
Any tamer who values their own life and the lives of others always carries an electric rod, which can heat the irons to a glowing red in an instant, ready to tame and control when needed. It's well known that wild animals can only be contained by the fiery point of a heated iron. And so great is its power that in minor insurrections, simply touching them with an iron whose tip has been painted red is enough. So when I saw the tamer grab an iron and flip the switch, I had no doubt what was about to happen. Despite all my courage, hatred, and self-control, I couldn't help but feel a deep chill when I saw the iron being plunged into the mouth of the electric oven, while my desperate impotence exploded in a loud roar. It was, after all, the only thing that tore me away from the torture, and I'm sure that back in the Ramahal, in the lost and mourned jungle, the wandering shadow of my father responded with another proud and encouraging roar to his true offspring.
Well, well,
The tamer exclaimed, with a sarcastic smile turning his head.
it seems we're complaining already. So soon? No, my former friend, we're not there yet. 1,000 degrees is just the beginning. When we reach 1,200, then we'll talk. Patience.
I lost count of the times. 30, 40, 50 times. The dazzling iron pierced my flesh, not with swift brutality, but with a terrifying, calm and calculated cruelty, searching with painstaking precision the most sensitive points, returning again to the open wound, tearing my entrails apart. I curled up, head in hands, eyes closed, and silently endured the agony of each new wound. The torture persisted, relentless and methodical, seeping under my belly despite my contorted position, accompanied by the tamer's eerily sweet voice.
It's not worth it to be unfair to those who care about you. Don't think I'm doing this to hurt you, my old friend. Ah, yes, it's going to hurt a bit. Be brave, Raja. Here too. But it will soon pass. A little more in the same spot. It hurts more, but it helps to cure the bad mood. Ah, does it hurt a lot?
A dull moan had escaped from my chest.
Then again, then. It's so sad to betray a friend's trust.
It was the last thing I saw. Charred, burned, turned into a living wound. I completely dropped my head and lost consciousness. Who can even begin to appreciate the incredible strength and self-control it takes to conceal a burning hunger and thirst for revenge for 2 whole years, all the while pretending to be completely submissive and meek? It's a hunger and thirst, not just for revenge, but for the thrill of victory, the pleasure of the gods and tigers. I had to suppress my rage against Kimberley, with its relentless cruelty, ferocity, and every loathed aspect of its being, all while maintaining a facade of meekness. It's a truly heroic feat to keep that up for so long. After the torture, I lay motionless in a corner of the cell for a whole month, unable to move a muscle, in order to avoid feeling even more agonizing pain. When I finally mustered the strength to stand, I was met with a horrific sight. My own burned and disfigured body, reduced to a pitiful, crippled tiger, overwhelmed with despair. I wondered, what's left of me now? Why bother living, dragging this broken shell of a once mighty tiger on my shaky legs? Just like 5 years ago, when I limped back to my lair after being captured, I heard a voice this time too, offering words of hope in the darkness. "So, you think there'll be no trace left?" the voice in me whispered. "I'm not sure about that. Everything will return to its normal state. It's just that I let myself get a bit carried away. The burns were atrocious. I see. But the skin will heal, you'll see, and in 6 months there won't be a trace left. I didn't hear another word. I was already envisioning my comeback as Raja. My strength would surge back, and my incredible skin, inherited from my proud heritage, would be restored to its former glory. The thrill of that thought was exhilarating, and in the depths of my being, I made a solemn vow to myself, invoking the memory of my father and my own royal lineage, to channel all my energy into one singular goal: to strike a crushing blow, to tear off Kimberley's head with a single mighty bite. Then another torture began. For 2 years, I was the tamest beast that had ever groaned under the whip of a tamer. There was no insult, blow, or lash that I didn't respond to with a gentle grunt of passing annoyance, but nothing more. I couldn't pretend to be even more docile, because excessive meekness arouses justifiable suspicion. And I also had to fight against my tamer's distrust for 2 years. They warned him.
Be careful. This animal has changed too much to be trusted with its meekness.
We'll see soon enough.
Even though he kept a constant eye on me, he still made me perform with my fellow animals. The truth is that his pride as a tamer overpowered his distrust, and flattered by my docility, he concluded that it was just a personal triumph, capable of completely dominating a fierce beast that had already felt his terrible whip. However, he extended several true tests to verify the authenticity of my current meekness. He even went so far as to commit stupid actions, one of which was to vigorously whip a lion while I was right behind him. And as we know, there are few things more dangerous. I resisted, however, gritting my teeth until they creaked. The temptation to tear his back with a swipe of my paw, and the triumphant gaze he gave me when he turned around, was my real reward. With this, his vanity completely blinded him, and against the advice of his fellow professionals, he risked taking the decisive test that marks both the maximum audacity of a tamer and the goodness of a wild animal's character, putting his head in the animal's mouth. Finally, what I had longed for had finally arrived, what I had constantly and painfully aspired for. From then on, I had devised my plan, a packed gala night at the circus, and Captain Kimberley's new triumph would thunder through the arena. That night, crunch. Unless they are a tiger and intensely hate a man, no one can appreciate what I felt as I savored the anticipation of his spine shattering. And the hour finally arrived. The newspaper headlines had loudly announced the new feat of Kimberley, King of Tamers.
Tonight, see Captain Kimberley's most daring feat, the most dangerous test. Heroism in all its splendor. Captain Kimberley will put his head inside the mouth of Raja, the man-eating tiger from the Ramahal. Raja, king of the beasts.
The elegant world, ever thirsty for sensational experiences, had answered the call. The dazzling circus, aglow with lights, presented the crème de la crème of Calcutta's mute performers in its arena. The legend of the man-eater was familiar to all, and the public thronged to witness the humbling of its imperial offspring. The son of that formidable predator, now meekly submitting to having his head submerged in its mouth, was a sight too astonishing to miss. I too was eager to see it. At 11 o'clock at night, after a lengthy interlude that only heightened the public's excitement, Captain Kimberley made his grand entrance into the ring, strutting confidently to the center. With a flourish, he clicked his heels together and saluted with his whip, receiving a thunderous ovation from the audience. Moments later, the large cage containing 7 ferocious-looking animals entered, and the usual routine commenced. However, the public was growing restless, finding the preceding acts trivial. They were clamoring to see just me, the main attraction. Finally, my turn arrived, and my cage appeared amidst new and fervent applause. Kimberley gave an imperious signal, and a deep silence followed his command. Then, as the cage doors opened, I entered the bright spotlight of the ring. Here's an explanation. The public deeply admires the test that consists of cornering a wild beast with lashes. The animal roars, appears to launch itself at the tamer, and the impression of this is strong on the spectator. However, nothing is less dangerous, and tamers know this well as long as the lash does not touch the beast. Otherwise, the tamer is in immense danger. Of course, yet one of the greatest skills of tamers is to perfectly simulate a lash, making it crackle in the air just a few centimeters away from the roaring animal. The illusion is complete, and that's where the public's excitement comes from. This feat was repeated with me that night, and since it involved a real tiger that would soon open its jaws to engulf the tamer's defenseless head, the illusion was tremendous for the public. After Kimberley seemingly calmed me down with his hands, he opened my jaws, and under the bright spotlights, the public saw my powerful fangs shining like funeral daggers. The silence became even more imposing, if that's possible. Then, with a gentle movement, Kimberley leaned in, and from that moment on, his head disappeared.
Inside my mouth.
The mouth of Raja, at my complete disposal. The memory of the tortures I had endured burned its way up to my soul like a surge of molten lava rising within the crater of a volcano. So too did 1,000 voices more scorching than ever. Mine! Mine at last! I'm sure I didn't flinch, nor did I betray the slightest hint of the deep joy that revenge brought to my heart. When, after a moment, Kimberley tried to withdraw his head, he stumbled against my fangs. I, on the other hand, felt the tremor that ran through his entire body. He gently submerged again, and with equal pause, tried to withdraw once more. Again he stumbled. The audience had followed the maneuver with deep anguish, and when, the second time, they realized that the head wasn't coming out because the passage had narrowed, a cry of terror resonated through the hall, just as the guards made tragic signals for silence. To fully understand this, another explanation is necessary. Wild animals in captivity in general, and particularly elephants and big cats, suffer from a sudden and fulminant change in character, which manifests as an explosion of fury. The terrifying aspect of this change is that it occurs without any warning signs just a second before. Suddenly, the most docile and affectionate animal with its owner launches itself with uncontrollable rage, and from that moment on, it remains a real and true wild beast until its death. This madness is extremely common in elephants, and although less so in lions and tigers, it still occurs. That's why the tamer's constant vigilance is essential, especially when they have a lion behind them, and that's why certain acts, like the one being performed with me at that moment, are so terribly dangerous. If, in the moment when the head is submerged, the animal suddenly changes character, that was the belief of the guards, and that's why they imposed silence to avoid alarming the animals. But no, there was no madness in me, and I knew perfectly well what I was doing. I also knew, as long as I persisted in my attitude, no one would dare take a step against me. And meanwhile, I savored with ferocious delight the agony of Kimberley, that cruel tiger tamer. Among the terrified anguish of the audience, some voices sounded.
Quick! Kill him! He needs to be shot!
No, be careful! The tamer's life is at stake.
It can't be done. Silence!
A hunter, a marksman who never misses.
Yes! Yes!
There is no one. Ha ha! A minute had already passed. In my mouth I felt Kimberley's cold head, while his immobile body, tetanized by the anguish of death, hung from my jaws. A minute of that torture as well worth the 30 I had suffered under his fiery point. And I was about to conclude it by tearing his vertebrae apart, when my gaze met a pale face of manly beauty that had been observing me from a distance. The first shock I felt was at the serene majesty of that face. The second, when I felt the gaze of those black eyes upon me. A sea of memories flooded back to me from my distant childhood, and I suddenly saw the scene. Lord Aberdale advancing towards my mother, his eyes fixed on the terrible gaze of the beast. It was he, yes, the adolescent from back then. And suddenly I saw him in another scene, lying next to my mother, frozen in heroism and near death. Yes, it was he, and with my own desolation I had returned all the pain I could to his hand. The shouts continued.
A hunter, Lord Aberdale. He's the only one who can do it.
Yes, Lord Aberdale. He's the one who conceived it. Aberdale killed his parents, and Raja's the cub that was going to devour him. Raja.
All eyes had turned to Aberdale, the famous English aristocrat who was honoring the circus with his presence that night. Only he was considered capable of a feat to rescue Kimberley. I saw him emerge from the box, impeccably dressed, and advance onto the track with that supreme elegance that I remembered well. His beauty, now virile, had retained the same magical power of his gaze. I saw him approach the cage and open the door with his gloved hand, and unable to tear myself away from the fascination that held me captive, I saw him stop in front of me. At first, a cry of terror had erupted from the circus crowd when they saw Lord Aberdale's act of either insane madness or supreme bravery. But then, the most profound silence of anguish had followed. Everyone knew that the young Lord of England had earned immense praise from the Indian Empire for his exceptional bravery in hunting. However, his latest action went beyond what was considered acceptable for a human hero, surpassing the limits of bravery and entering uncharted territory. I, for my part, felt as I had felt before, the influence of that radiant valor and serenity, and in this state of electric fascination, I saw Aberdale place his hand on Kimberley's shoulder and look at me in the eyes without any hatred. "Let him go," his gaze whispered softly to me. "What you're doing is cowardly." No one certainly heard a word, but everyone was convinced that my silent growl had responded to something I had understood. The audience stirred, seized by amazement and terror.
Look, he's talking to him. He's talking to him. Oh, he knows him well.
He must have magical powers.
Yes, he understands him.
The audience is in awe, convinced that Lord Aberdale possesses a special, almost supernatural ability to communicate with me. I couldn't contain another growl, but this time it was due to the stupidity of those people. What the young lord possessed was very simple, and it was precisely what the others lacked. Courage, deep and profound serenity, and a great inner strength that is intelligence. There is no animal that doesn't understand in some way what is being said to it, as long as the human soul has a true temperament. It won't understand the meaning of the words, but it will understand the sense of the voice, in which thought awakens the modulations that express affection, hatred, love, etc. Animal tamers profess this axiom. Never let the animal you fear detect it in your voice. And above all, that the commanding voice has such tranquil security that the beast never comes to understand that, if it wanted to, it could disobey. The day a tiger, a lion, realizes that its will is stronger than its tamer's, the tamer is lost. I, however, despite the immense and tranquil force in Lord Aberdale's order, had a moment of rebellion. A low, growling snarl emerged from my throat, but I had to narrow my eyes because I felt that gaze telling me again, "You could have devoured me once and you didn't." I had lost my strength, but not my sense. You tried to revive a life that I had not taken from your parents, and I know you were rewarded. Don't tarnish that action now with a murder that's not worthy of you, who have seen better valor in your youth, nor of me, who knew you with greater nobility. Oh yes, we had met in a very different situation from the present one, and I didn't need to be reminded of it. But that same past evoked memories which, far from humbling me, only served to exacerbate my current degradation, and resisting its magical influence, I rebelled again. With a muffled roar, as violent as it could be despite the obstacle of that miserable head that refused to let go, I threw my defiance at him. Lord Aberdale, leaning down, picked up the whip that had fallen at my feet, and as he straightened up, I saw that he was pale. No, you are not the same one who, at the expense of his freedom, tried to save my life, his paleness seemed to say. Aberdale threw away the now useless whip and, without deigning to look at me again, left the cage, dusting off his gloves from the whip's powder. Then, with a voice of unwavering authority, which the paleness of that heroic face made even more compelling and irresistible,
Let go!
He told me, and this time aloud. During the 5 seconds in which I desperately tried to resist his gaze, I felt oppressed, dominated, and crushed in every part of my being by the spark of will in those black eyes. And I let go, and from my open and drooling jaws, the head of the tamer fell and hit the floor with great impact. And he fainted. Never again will a more immense ovation be seen from a public conquered by an act of superhuman will. The electric lamps trembled, shaken by the delirious clamor, and only the respect for Aberdale's high birth prevented the crowd from lifting him up in triumph. The show was effectively over with that almost tragic ending, and while the guards rushed to the cage with iron bars to free the tamed tamer, Lord Aberdale left the circus without his attitude indicating in the slightest what he had just accomplished, and the public dispersed, one by one. And in a corner of the cage, surrounded by iron bars, I was left, now incessantly roaring my defeat and the new triumph of my tamer, while my soul was consumed by burning waves of unsatisfied revenge. Kimberley spent 15 days between life and death with a cerebral attack. He was constantly delirious, begging with heart-wrenching screams to be beheaded once and for all. He couldn't bear the horrific torture of feeling trapped in my jaws for another second. Finally, his robust constitution prevailed, and a month after that tragic night, I saw Kimberley enter the beast's enclosure and advance with difficulty towards me, holding onto the bars of the cages for support. When I saw him again, with his expression of hatred and cruelty directed towards me, the electric clock went up in a flash in my memory, and a cloud of blood blinded me. I lunged at him with a roar, and the entire cage shook from the tremendous impact against the bars. Kimberley smiled, with a smile 1,000 times worse than a death threat.
No, no,
he said, patting me with a gesture.
We won't start again just yet, because I'm still weak and I want to enjoy all my strength to appreciate in full what you'll feel with the new toy that I'm having prepared for you. I warn you, you've lost the chance to take revenge, and this is due to your cowardice, your capital defect. Raja, you didn't have the courage to cut off my head with one blow, nor the dignity to resist a single man, even if it's Lord Aberdale, who threatened you with a whip like a vile dog. This is what you know, but I can swear to you that you will never again be offered an opportunity like that pure one to avenge yourself, and then I esteem it a duty to protect the good name of my beasts from your new acts of abjection and cowardice which would dishonor your species. Reflect on this carefully, Raja. Strive to master your naturally weak and fearful nature, because I am, for your minor faults of ingratitude towards me, trying out a new corrective, much more effective, believe me, than that the electric prod.
That was Kimberley. His inquisitorial cruelty and sweetness were well known. What unexpected and terrible torment was I about to face? The next day, 2 people entered. I had a shock, and my heart expanded in a vital wave that I knew well. In front of me was Lord Aberdale, accompanied by Kimberley, and his attitude expressed the deepest respect and pride at being by the side of the high aristocrat.
"My lord, here is Raja,"
said Kimberley, stopping. Lord Aberdale then looked at me, and I felt my whole body vibrate with emotion. He undoubtedly remembered something from a distant past, which was also what I remembered.
"Yes, he's very changed. It's been a long time since we last saw each other."
He smiled. Kimberley avoided looking at me.
"I believe that it will be for you to—"
Aberdale continued.
"It's impossible to keep it with you any longer after what has happened. I wish to have it."
"You, my lord, but it's a vengeful and cruel beast as far as one can say."
"Not so much."
Aberdale smiled again.
"Besides, I have certain reasons for not believing it to be so,"
he added, passing his hand over my head behind the bars. I let out a slight growl but didn't move. Kimberley turned pale with spite and envy when he saw that I didn't tear apart the hand of the bold man.
"Be careful, my lord. It's a vile beast."
"With you, it's possible." "I'll take that chance, Kimberley," I added. The natural greed of Kimberley expanded with joy at the enormous sum he could obtain, but at the same time he burned with the desire to appease his resentment towards me with new tortures, and which he would have to abandon if he lost me.
"My lord, a tamed tiger like this is worth a lot."
"How much?"
Aberdale asked simply.
"I don't know. He is worth a lot, my lord."
"Or perhaps 1,000.
Lord Aberdale repeated, looking at him.
"Perhaps 1,000 more, my lord."
"Then 2,000 will be enough for you. Go through the Bank of England. From here, in an hour's time, they will hand over the sum to you. But with one condition, that the amount slightly exceeding what you indicated will serve as a guarantee. You yourself, since the guards can be dismissed, will lead him to my bungalow in Ramelhall. Don't you think it's excessive?"
"By the gods, I know Aberdale's palace is not a hut, my lord."
Kimberley objected with a surprised and respectful reproach.
"Thanks for your kindness, Kimberley. So, we have a deal then?"
"We have a deal, my lord. When should I leave?"
"We go tonight."
Aberdale left. Then, trembling with rage, Kimberley showed me the iron rod and hurled at me.
"Ah, maldito damned beast. You escape my vengeance, protected by that damned aristocrat who the devil confound, and who has some kind of diabolical relationship with you."
"Oh, but before you leave here, I'm going to teach you a lesson that you'll remember for the rest of your life, Captain Kimberley." He called the guards, and despite my strong resistance, they managed to put a collar with chains around my neck, which they attached to one side of the cage. I found myself thus immobilized, unable to take a step forward, nor able to extend my claw beyond a certain limit. On the precise edge of this limit, Kimberley sat in a chair, whip in hand, and then, while I made incredible efforts to stretch and reach just a few centimeters further, nothing more, and tear out his entrails. Kimberley lashed my face with the whip, once and 100 times. Oh, what immense despair! Nothing was lacking for me to reach him, just a few centimeters, and I was there, crucified, delivered to the nameless ignominy of that whipping as if I were a wretched cur, while Kimberley, crossed-legged and with his arm tranquilly resting on the back of the chair, lashed my face with rhythmic movements of his whip. No one has ever drunk a deeper shame than the one that miserable scoundrel made me swallow. Finally, he stood up, saying to me,
"Well, you can now go live with your new friend. Don't forget how Captain Kimberley treated you."
I would have preferred death. We left at night. The train journey had no major incidents, except for a shock without consequences in Carrick, which roughly shook the wagon, but which had a transcendental importance for me. 2 bars had come loose. No guardian noticed, nor did I, until I was transferred to the cart, in which I was to continue my journey along the trail through the forest, leading to the foothills of the Himalayas. Lord Aberdale and his entourage rode ahead on horseback, quite far away. Kimberley and the guards accompanied me in another cart. The second night of travel, I noticed the loosening of the bars. What a flame of insane joy! The forest, my native land, none of that mattered to me. But Kimberley, yes, I felt the affront of those cowardly lashes right on my face. The broken bars were payback for the lashes, and definitive payback. Oh yes, dawn was beginning to break. As I pushed aside one bar with my claws, the forged iron let out a shrill screech, and I felt someone coming hurriedly towards me. I had no time to lose. I immediately pushed aside the other bar, and the guard, the one with the cruel face with whom I had a long-standing account, appeared before me. He barely had time to see what was happening and shout, "Stop!" With a hoarse roar, I had fallen upon him, immediately sinking into the forest. Behind me the guard lay with his entrails open and the clamor of his companions and Kimberley. I still heard Kimberley's voice shouting, sending news of the catastrophe to Lord Aberdale. Someone fired a shot, and no more. I was crouched at the edge of a path, which my pursuers would inevitably take. Ah, the native air, the pure sky, the scents that I had breathed in when I was small. There, in this landscape that sang the excellence of my royal blood, I was going to avenge the affront of Kimberley's lashes and his crossed legs. An hour passed. Suddenly, I felt footsteps approaching and heard the voice of a native.
"I'm not going any further, Sahib. The path ends there, and it's not prudent to advance without beaters."
I stealthily poked my head over a fallen trunk and saw the native and Kimberley stopped 20 meters from me. A low, muted roar at ground level, whose distance, for that reason, could not be gauged, shook them violently. Kimberley turned pale.
"Well, now it's ours,"
he murmured.
"You go back and tell Lord Aberdale that he's waiting for him here."
The native fled in a precipitous race while Kimberley looked anxiously all around.
"I'll let them settle it among themselves,"
I heard him muttering.
"Besides, Raja will take care of him, and I'll make sure to get another 2,000 pounds from his family."
I climbed up a tree. He didn't have time. With a sudden roar, I fell from a formidable leap, 15 meters from him, standing in all my fullness. Kimberley saw for the first time what a real Bengal tiger in the full jungle was like. A tamer of beasts is not necessarily a hunter, as the former requires patience, above all, and the latter, courage, above all. Oh, it was not Lord Aberdale. The rifle trembled in his hands, and I began to advance towards him, my eyes fixed on his. Everything, his face, his clothes, even his smell, brought before my eyes. The lash, and above all, that crossed leg while he was taunting me. The ray of my gaze gave him a burst of courage, and lifting the rifle to his face, he fired. I felt a sharp pain in my back, and in a second I was before him. His fear was so terrible when he saw me face to face. Free this time. The weapon fell from his hands, and he let out a scream, just as I opened my jaws and closed them over his head. Ah, he was there, no, the being who had deeply disturbed the first feelings of my childhood with his heroism. And the seconds passed, and my soul was steeped in the supreme delight of erasing the stain of the lashes. But my fate was already sealed. Suddenly, a loud and thunderous noise shook the ground beneath me, announcing a frantic horseback ride. Moments later, Lord Aberdale appeared on the winding path, hatless and pale, his face etched with anguish and regret for not arriving sooner. I saw him leap from the horse and advance towards me with the revolver in his hand. I heard him shout with his clear voice of imperial will, covering me with the aim of his revolver.
Let him go!
But this time, no. He didn't know what my daily torment had been for 5 years. What the tortures and humiliations the miserable man had inflicted on me. And he didn't have, like me, a bullet in his back. And looking straight at Aberdale, I clenched my jaws. Crunch! As Kimberley's decapitated body fell from my mouth, I saw a shadow pass across Aberdale's marble-like face, and I instantly felt the blast of the shot and a searing pain in my lungs. Everything spun around me, and I fell heavily to the ground. Here my memoirs end. Now, as I recall the pains here, lying on a cool mat, I have Lord Aberdale by my side, reading, whose hand occasionally reaches down to pet my head. We are in Aberdale's palace, in the heart of Ramahal. Behind us, the dark Himalayas sink into the sky their immaculate whiteness. In front of us, beyond the palm trees of the park, the native jungle sends me its enticing perfume. But I close my eyes in bliss, and as Lord Aberdale, without taking his eyes off the book, lowers his white hand again, I feel at his touch that my being expands with an electric thrill, and I lightly pass my tongue over that heroic hand, happy to be his.
Thank you for joining us in this sorry tale of the Man-Eater, adapted from the original Spanish short story entitled El Devorador de Hombres by S. Fragoso Lima. This tale serves as a powerful reminder that animal cruelty has no place in our world, and it highlights the importance of protecting our endangered wildlife, like the majestic Bengal tigers. If this story has inspired you, we invite you to subscribe to the Bug-Eyed Tales channel. By subscribing, you'll support our efforts to share stories that educate, entertain, and inspire. And don't forget to press the like button. Thank you for being part of this journey. We look forward to sharing more stories with you until next time.
They march in line, rhythm of an ancient time. Underneath the starry sky, hear the jungle's lullaby. While safari, feel the thrill. Every heartbeat stands so still. In the wild we find our way. In the jungle's laws we sway. Cobra slithers in the grass. Head the mighty stands so still. In the wild we find our way. In the jungle's laws we sway. Cobra slithers in the grass as the mighty tigers pass. Monsoon rains begin to pour. Nature's symphony we adore. While safari, feel the thrill. Every heartbeat stands so still. In the wild we find our way. In the jungle's laws we sway. Through the wilds of India, adventures end in splendor. Quiet now, the jungle sings.